Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fuck Wellness. I'm Mallory,
And I'm McKenna.
and it's just us,
Oh my God, the two M's.
the little beans. And we are talking about internal family systems today, or IFS.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess on the book it says internal family systems model, so I don't want to leave out a word.
True.
IFSM, I suppose, if you're being semantic. But yeah, I would say McKenna's been talking about this for a long time. And I'm really glad that I'm reading this book because now, like, most of the things that you said in the past make a lot more sense understanding this model. Like, before I was like, yeah, okay. And I like got the very basic level of what you were saying. And now I'm like, oh, this all makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad you sent me this book.
I'm so glad that you ended up reading it because I feel like I sent it and I was like, you know what? I could send Mal lots of different books, but this has been selfishly something that has made a huge impact on me. And I feel like at times your brain and my brain work in very similar ways.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I think that she could get a lot out of this. I think that was also your era where you were like, no more nonfiction. And I was like, just kidding. Like, please read just this other one because I think you'll like it.
Well, and like to be honest, I feel like I would have procrastinated reading this a lot longer if my therapist and I hadn't started our therapy book club because I think it's really hard to get yourself to read a book like this. Like for example, people listening, the title of the book is Healing Trauma and Restoring Wholeness with the Internal Family Systems Model. And I feel like looking at that, you're like, fuck, this is gonna this is gonna
Yeah.
fuck me up. So knowing that I got to read it and then debrief with my therapist, I feel like really incentivized me reading it.
And to be fair, I listened to it and I was already familiar with a lot of the concepts. So I kind of took the roundabout way.
How did you learn about IFS?
Well, my therapist does parts work, and so it was a critical part of my therapy almost right out of the gate. I've been with my current therapist since 20 I think I think 2019. So a while now. And when she kind of started working with me with one brain spotting and then two parts work and then three somatic work, I didn't I don't know when you're, like, exposed to something new like that, I feel like you just kind of go along with it. You're like, "Okay, I guess this is what we do now," without having to know too much about it. And then I feel like as I started to get more comfortable and as we started getting layers deeper, I feel like it just naturally, like, my knowledge of it progressed as she and I worked through things with that framework. And so it was a really natural exposure. Like, she never sat me down and was like, just so you know, I do this thing called IFS, or like I work with parts work, or obviously I could look at her certifications and stuff on her website. But at the time, most of those certifications, I was like, what's this? Okay, cool. Like, I
Cool.
had no
Yeah.
idea. So yeah, that was kind of my exposure. But your therapist was familiar with IFS, right?
Yeah. I mean, she's definitely not like a parts work specialty or anything, but
Mhm.
I think she's having a lot of fun actually, like getting
Oh,
to practice it. So it has been good. Also, I feel like, yeah, well, we can get into what it is, but when we say parts work and then IFS, like I don't know how you would describe this, Ken, but like parts work is the main component of IFS.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Because it boils down, we'll do an in-depth, just definition. I was choosing between description and definition, and yeah, a hybrid came out. But we'll read the full definition of what it is. But essentially, like, if IFS is the umbrella, parts work are the parts in it. You know what I mean? Like that's probably more confusing, but oh well.
Okay, I guess we can start off with, so I have, just for context, everyone listening, I have the book that McKenna sent me, and she no longer has the book. So even though I would say she probably knows more, I'm going to be the one reading from the book.
Mal has
Um,
the Bible. I have
I do.
the website pulled up though, so
Okay. Well, okay, just starting off from like the very beginning. So first of all, IFS is created by Richard Schwartz,
mhm.
who is a psychotherapist. Yeah,
That's a really good question. I don't know
I'm
exactly
pretty
what
sure
his
he is.
certifications
Oh,
are.
is the creator of IFS. He is a faculty at Harvard Medical School. Okay, yeah. Well, he's a qualified man, is I
Yeah.
think what is important to know here.
Yeah. He's
Um,
licensed, you know. Actually, I don't know that. Take
no,
that
he's for
back.
sure
Okay,
licensed.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a doctor, like in terms of like he has a PhD.
Yeah, and also this is now a system of education that people can get certified in. So if you
Yeah.
are in a therapy space or like someone like me or even Mal, like if you're in a health coaching space, this can apply.
Hmm.
And they are so popular that they have lotteries for their trainings. I've entered multiple lotteries and my therapist was like, "Oh yeah, I have therapist friends who have been waiting for 5+ years to get into an IFS training because they are just so popular." And there are
Wow.
levels to them. I don't know how many, so there's, like, level 1 and level 2 for sure, but I think it keeps going.
Okay. So the beginning of the book talks about how we were raised to believe that there's like one mind and it controls our whole body. And if anything feels like quote unquote defective, like those are things we need to beat out of us. Like everything goes back to this like one brain controlling everything. And Richard Schwartz pushes back on that with the concept of parts, that we have an innumerable amount of parts that help us in our daily life exist and function and have different purposes. Um, and those parts can be put into roles they don't like as much when we deal with trauma, hard situations, loss, grief, etc. And I think Richard Schwartz would say that it's not that those parts are bad. It's not that they are like
No
inherently
bad parts.
no bad parts. It's not that they're inherently evil, but they're trying to protect us in
Mhm.
a way that they think is helpful, but maybe isn't helpful to us day
Right,
to day. I
right.
also found this so interesting too after our month on diagnoses, because I feel like he's not a fan of diagnoses because not a fan in the sense of sometimes when people like they can vilify a diagnosis rather than
Mhm.
like looking at it with compassion.
Yeah,
And I
and give it
think,
too much power maybe.
yeah. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Anything to add on that part?
No, I just has been thinking about this chat with you, and I just feel like you're the perfect person to do it because you're so good at taking like these big concepts and making them really digestible. Whereas I'm like, and this is how I feel about it. You're like, and this is what it is. So I feel like it's gonna be good that you're in this conversation too.
I highlighted this part that I feel like, well, first of all, thank you for saying that. That
You're
means a
so
lot.
welcome.
But I highlighted this part that I think describes it pretty well, which is the mono mind, again, that like one brain paradigm has caused us to fear our parts and view them as pathological. In our attempts to control what we consider to be disturbing thoughts and emotions, we just end up fighting, ignoring, disciplining, hiding, or feeling ashamed of those impulses that keep us from doing what we want to do in our lives. And then we shame ourselves for not being able to control them. In other words, we hate what gets in our way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a really, like, that quote feels really emblematic of his belief that by viewing like parts work is the compassionate view of ourself.
Yeah. Can I read this first paragraph from the website?
Mm-hmm.
So the website is ifs-institute.com, and there's a 3-paragraph description of what it is, along with a linked video on Richard Schwartz explaining internal family systems. That's a hard word to say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we'll link the website and you can watch this video if you want. But the first paragraph says IFS is a transformative tool that conceives every human being as a system of protected and wounded inner parts led by a core self. We believe the mind is naturally multiple, and that is a good thing. Just like members of family, inner parts are forced from their valuable states into extreme roles within us. Self is in everyone. It can't be damaged. It knows how to heal. So
Yeah,
I
that's a
think
great
that's a good way
summary.
to, yeah, explain it too. Obviously, they do a good job on their website. But what if we were like criticizing, like, this could
That's
be better?
fucking sucked. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but the idea of you having a core self and where from from a place of self you can move from is a healthy place to move from rather than moving from different parts of yourself.
Yeah. And I feel like maybe we can give an example here
Yeah, I
of
was thinking
like,
about that.
I mean, I don't know if we want to give a personal example, but I'll give a quick hypothetical example just for context. But for example, say someone, you know, had someone in their families with substance use disorder growing up, and that was like a somewhat traumatic experience for them. They might have a part that, either protected them or tried to like, you know, be avoidant, disassociate, etc. And that part might be stuck at that age, even though that
Mhm.
person is a lot older. And it still is like getting in the way of them functioning day to day because it is still trying to play that same role that it was playing when they were a little kid.
Yeah. And a lot of, the parts that come up can arise from situations where it was created to keep you safe, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
not like these parts, I don't know, because I feel like sometimes when you look at this, it's easy to think, "Oh, I don't have control over the situation." And I don't think it's necessarily that, like that you don't have control over your internal sense or internal world or your mind. But I do think that there are things that we can break down to understand, okay, this is why this part keeps showing up in this people
Mm-hmm.
pleasing area of my life. And that doesn't have to be a scary thing when we have the information that's associated with why we are behaving in a certain way. So I think that for me, this work has given me so much more confidence in myself and compassion with myself, especially when I feel like there's a part that's reacting that's stuck at a nonverbal age or at 3 years old. 3 is a big year for me, in terms of parts work, and then also 8 years old is a big year for me. And so it's interesting to just kind of see where those attachments are. And it's not like as soon as you understand all of it, you can just snap your fingers and be like, and we're not going to have those thoughts anymore. And this part isn't going to be as vocal anymore, but you can work with it and engage with it and in a conscious way.
Yeah. And a lot of your parts also, Richard Schwartz talks about this, is like legacy parts that maybe you inherited from your like community, your
Mhm.
parents, your role models, whatever. And so it can also be a lot of like unlearning those legacy parts too. I can't remember if it was in this book or no, it was in Malibu Rising by Taylor whatever, the one who wrote Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
Oh, yeah.
Well, anyway, my point is in that she had a beautiful metaphor that when we are born, we're given a box of things metaphorically from our parents. And as we grow up, we get to choose like what of those things we want to
Mhm.
keep and which of those things we want to give away. And sometimes we just need to put that box down and not carry it anymore. And I like think that's so relevant to the parts work where it's like we all have legacy parts, and a lot of adulthood is us figuring out which of those legacy parts is serving us and which one of those parts maybe isn't serving us as much or needs a new
Completely.
role,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you have read this, you know, more recently than I have. But in the book, does he assign roles to certain parts like the firefighter or like,
Mm-hmm.
do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. So,
Protector,
yeah,
exile.
protector.
Yeah.
Yep. So I have less experience with those definitions. I have worked one time with an exile part, and it was the most brutal experience ever. It was so incredibly intense and difficult, but I truly believe that we're not kind of given those access to those parts until we're ready to really work through them. And thankfully, I really trust and respect my therapist to help me navigate those moments. But and also, we didn't say this at the beginning of the podcast, but please know that these are just our personal opinions. Like, we are not providing any sort of
No.
professional advice here. And, all opinions are just that, opinions. But if I could just give a brief window into the process of how I work with this, because it's become a little bit less rigid, I would say, as I continue my work with my therapist. But basically, let's say I come with a situation or something that feels really heavy or an emotion that I'm feeling. And oftentimes she'll kind of pause me when I'm just talking, 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 and she'll very gently say, that she's hearing a lot of story in what I'm describing. Like, yeah, I'm hearing a lot of story. Can we take a minute to check in with your body? And then I will begrudgingly stop because my brain really likes to gnaw on things and process them verbally. And I could just talk in circles about an issue that I'm having or an experience I had. And so she really forces me to like not do that, to go into my body and then to check in on where I'm feeling and what I'm feeling. So I think she kind of combines it with a somatic approach where we often talk about where in my body this is coming from. And then we kind of focus in on a specific issue or experience. And then we pull eventually different things from that experience. So oftentimes she'll ask like, what does this feel like? What does it look like? What does it smell like? Or what color is it? How big is it? Those sorts of things. And then we work directly with this part and ask it questions directly. So like, what do you need from this part of yourself? What age is this part of yourself? Can you, if it's a protector part, because I have quite a few of those, it's like, can you tell me what this part thinks that they're protecting you from? What would happen if this part wasn't there to protect you? And questions like that seem kind of one, obvious, and two, a little bit silly on the surface. But when you're engaging with a part of yourself like that, especially a wounded part that's really young, it can be so beneficial that to just know that that part is being heard, and my activation level by the end of the session is often much lower because instead of forcing that part of myself like into a metaphorical box, I'm able to pull it to the center and say, I see you. This must have been really hard. And remind that part, hey, I'm actually no longer 3 years old. I'm now 26 years old and I have a lot more tools and I can do this. And thank you so much for being there. But now, can I give you a new role? And a lot of times with my younger parts, like the 3-year-old, the 8-year-old, whatever, when I ask, like, hey, what would you rather be doing instead of protecting me from this thing? It's almost always playing. Like, I would rather be playing. I'd rather be outside. And then I'm able to just tell that part, like, okay, like you get to do that. I'll keep checking in with you. And if you feel activated again, you can just come to me and then we can work together to get you back to playing. So it's kind of hard to intellectualize sometimes, I think, if people haven't done the work directly, but that's kind of a brief snapshot of how I engage with it.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful because I feel like reading the book, it can feel really abstract
Mhm.
of like, okay, yeah, I get the concept that I have parts, but like, how do I talk to those parts, you
Yeah.
know? And like,
Yeah.
for me, I feel like it hasn't been as intuitive as it is for you in some ways because I think you're much more in touch with that like side of you. So I feel like it's been a little bit harder, but I think one of the drills that Richard Schwartz has you do in the book is like finding your trailheads, I think is what he calls it, which
Mhm.
is like just being quiet for a second and see what comes up. Where are you feeling things in your body? And yeah, I think that was sort of helpful that it's not like a part is going to hop out and be like, "Hello, hi."
Yeah.
Like sometimes it
Yeah.
might, but like, it's yeah, I guess sometimes I think no, that's not the word I want to look for. But like it might not be as life-shattering in that moment like
Mhm.
of a hello
Yeah.
as you
Yeah.
might feel like it is. Like so interesting. I was going to bring this up later, but Richard Schwartz had talked about how especially with exiles, if you're trying to talk to them or like work with that part, they will do anything to make it so you don't talk to them. So like
Mhm.
they might make you super nauseous or they might give you
Mhm.
a headache or whatever. And so I was talking to my therapist on our session on Thursday and we were talking about body image and it was like really, really hard and we were like doing some parts work, and literally I almost fell asleep. Like that part like put me to sleep.
Isn't
And
that so wild?
yeah, like I was wide awake before, like truly, like no sleepiness. And then all of a sudden, like I kept like just rubbing my eyes. And my therapist is like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I just got so tired. Like I literally could fall asleep." And then for a second, it felt like I almost just completely fell asleep. It was so
For
wild. And
me
this, yeah,
For
go
me,
ahead.
that happens where I can't focus. So my brain will just list, like, make me think of anything that's so random and be like, remember in fifth grade when you wore this outfit? And I'll just be like, like over and over again because they're like, not safe. Alarm bells are going off. Like, let's not
Mhm.
go here.
Yeah. Yeah, I just highlighted this part, which is like parts that are frozen in dreadful scenes in the past and carry burdens from those time. They will do whatever they need to get your attention when you won't listen, punish you or others, convince others to take care of them, sabotage your plans, eliminate people in your life they see as a threat. To do these things and more, they can exacerbate or give you physical symptoms or diseases, nightmares and strange dreams, emotional outbursts, and chronic emotional states,
Hmm.
which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, our
Um,
bodies are just so powerful and willing to do literally whatever they need to do to keep us safe.
I will also say too, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, cool, but like I have no idea what you guys are talking about. On the website, I think he has a few recordings of him doing parts work with someone. In the book, he like links to it, but I haven't been on the website. But I found that really helpful to
Hmm.
listen to him walking through parts work. And then that made it a lot easier when I was like, okay, but how does that how is that relevant to my life?
Hmm.
It made it a lot easier to be like, okay, it's just like a lot more listening and like trying to see what parts need
Yeah.
my support.
Yeah.
I think that was really helpful.
And I think to your point, Mal, that my experience with parts work is really a parallel experience to like mediumship or something like
Yeah.
that in terms of listening to yourself. So I do think that that part is very easy for me. Not that the bringing everything up and working through the parts is easy, but the initial listening, it comes, I think, pretty naturally to me.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my highlights.
I can give an example of a recent win I had with parts work.
Yeah, I would love that.
So a couple months ago, I had gone on a few dates with this guy and
Oh yeah.
yeah, and kind of like it was a very casual situation, whatever, but I didn't really feel like this person was respecting my time. And I essentially sent him a text being and this part is just backstory, but basically saying, hey, like, even if this is casual, I do need some more communication. Like I carved out some time for you because you said that we were going to do something and then you're kind of flaking. Like, I'm not into that. And he kind of very quickly was like, I need to be out of this entirely. And I'm like, okay, cool. Bye. Like I read Mal the text and I was like shocked at what I said. But anyways, a couple months passed and this is new. Mal, I don't even think you know this part. But and I actually put it on my Instagram story. So you
Okay,
read the
no, I
text.
did see
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So anyways, a few days ago he reaches back out to me. And he's texting me and in the past, especially around okay, we're just going to get deep into my stuff right now. I'm
Yeah.
just going to air it all out. Around romantic relationships, especially like sexual relationships, I would often abandon myself to have that connection because it was a false sense of security for me in my attachment issues, I guess. And so having that connection with someone was essentially tricking my system into being like, we're safe because we have this connection and they can't leave because we have this connection. And obviously that's not rational and it's not even what I really wanted out of the person. But it is this weird like experience that I've been reckoning with of how I've engaged, especially in like physical relationships with people and why I've been in physical relationships that I truly at my core self didn't want to be in. So basically, he messages me and I don't really feel that much when he messages me, but he basically is like very verbal about, hey, like I'm feeling lonely. I was thinking about you. Like, would you want to hang out before you leave? And I kind of just like liked the message and moved on. And he kind of circled back and he was like, so it sounds like you don't want to hang out. And I had responded like, yeah, like I just, to be honest, I don't really know how I feel. I know that I didn't like how we engaged in our past conversation. I didn't like how that made me feel, but I'll let you know if anything changes. And I just left it at that. And when I told my therapist, like the, the timeline of how this happened and how me from a year ago would have said yes no matter what. And I used to think
Mhm.
that was like a people pleasing thing. And I actually don't think it's people pleasing. I think it was me trying to find some sort of safety in connections that weren't safe, combined with me continuously choosing people that I know will keep me at an arm's length or that I can
Mhm.
keep at an arm's length to never be truly vulnerable and truly connected to, because true connection means true vulnerability. And for
Mhm.
me, I kind of was using like I was using the bad parts on both sides to try and like keep myself safe and my system safe. And so when I told my therapist about this, she was like, "Wow, like it really sounds like you responded from a place of self, like from your self energy."
Mhm.
And that is like a huge deal. It might not sound like a huge deal, but it's taken years to even get to the place where a text message can show that I'm moving from self energy, a lot of, self appreciation and self worth, which is self energy, right? And not from one of my parts that's trying to manage the situation to make me feel quote unquote safe.
That's a great example.
Thanks.
I think you should be really proud of yourself.
Thank you. I am. It's been a time.
On my drive back from work today on the way to the podcast, I was thinking about how I put a lot of pressure on myself to be perfect. And it literally on my car ride, I was like, okay, well, let's think about what parts play a role in this like need for perfection. Because I realized whenever I, you know, how people say, like, oh, everyone makes mistakes, like, you'll make mistakes, blah, blah, blah. My first reaction to that is like, well, I will not make mistakes.
I'm the exact same way.
I'm like, well, everyone else can, but I will not. Like,
When I hit
I'm gonna play it so safe that I never make mistakes.
when I hit the elk, that was my first thought. I was like, people like me, this is a failure. People like me don't
Mhm.
do stuff like this. And
Mhm.
it's like, it's a fucking accident. But my brain is like, nope, that's less than perfection.
Yeah. So anyway, I was trying to dig into that on my car ride, but interestingly, I feel like my best example of parts work was in my newsletter a couple weeks ago because I've only had 3 sessions with my therapist doing this, but we were talking about my like fear of death, and we were talking about how my vivid memory of learning about death was like so shattering for me as like a little kid. And I will say too, I think at first when I read this book, I was like, well, I haven't dealt with any like extreme trauma in my life. Like I haven't really like lost anyone super close to me. Have one ACE, adverse childhood event, and it is my parents' divorce. So that for sure could be a part. But I think reading it, I was like, well, this might not relate to me because I haven't dealt with like extreme trauma. But I think it's important that like parts come in all shapes and sizes. And also, it doesn't have to be directly from childhood. Like our parts can change as we age. But I immediately was thinking about the part that learned about death. And I think that part is still really fucking scared about death. And it's so interesting to think about all of the protector parts that have like over the years developed. And like a lot of that is my OCD behaviors, like a lot of
Mhm.
my compulsive behaviors that I do every day. And it kind of goes back to the perfectionism where I'm like, if I do all of these things every single day, my parents will not die. Like
Mhm.
everyone else's parents can die. My parents will not die because I'm doing these things. So I think people can also think about it as, there are thinking about behaviors that are maybe protecting like the deep, like insecurity or I don't know, concern thing, whatever that you're dealing with. Like our behaviors sometimes protect us from things that we don't want to address yet.
Yeah. And also, I think to your point, it doesn't have to be a rational reason why we have some of these protector parts, right? Like,
No.
yeah, of course, there's a lot of things in my life that I can trace back to, okay, this was trauma and this is why this developed. But there's also some things that I just think happen sometimes and or as a result of that or something else or a mixture of all of the above.
Yeah,
And I
totally.
don't think it's important to have to understand that fully to its extent or even to understand parts work to its fullest extent. I think
No.
the only thing that you need to be willing to do is engage with it in a way where I don't know, it feels beneficial for you.
And I feel like it was so simple to me to be like, that part that learned about death is just really scared.
Mhm.
It's like I think I ruminate about death all the time, and so much of it is just like because I'm scared. Like
Yeah.
little Mallory's really scared that her parents are going to die, and yeah, I'm 27, but like that doesn't mean that that part is also 27. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I think that also gave me a lot of compassion for why these, similar to his whole spiel is like we tend to just like kill the messenger instead of listen to the message, which
Or
he writes.
shame that part of ourself for
Mhm.
having those thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, I was just having this conversation the other night about um like if you ever feel the like urge when you look over a building to think like what would it feel like to land on the ground and like die. And I was like, I think everyone to some degree like at least that goes through their mind. But
Mhm.
in like it's this someone had an actual word for what there's like a
Intrusive
psychological.
thoughts.
Yeah, but it's like a specific thing specifically on like the heights where we
Mm.
tend to um like view our death a lot more when we're at heights, but immediately you're like, "Oh my god, I'm literally crazy." Like I just thought about what it would feel like to land on the ground. But I think it's that way a lot of times with parts where when we have those intrusive thoughts, it's like I want those to go away. Like I want to
Mhm.
hit those out of the way instead of being like, "Hmm, where are those coming from?" And they're really uncomfortable. So I understand why our gut reaction would be like, or our like initial reaction would be like, I would like these to go away instantly because
Yeah.
they don't feel good.
Yeah. I think to give an example of sometimes what a part of my looks like myself, I guess is how I describe it, is like for example, let's say that I'm working through something that has a lot of like activation in my physical body and let's say I feel like I'm on the verge of a panic attack. And then I drop into my body and the first thing that I will see, let's say for example, this is something that's really familiar to me, is I'll see um like the Tasmanian devil like, just ripping inside of my body, just, like,
Mhm.
moving 1,000 miles a minute, like, destroying everything in its path. It feels
Mhm.
uncontrollable, it feels wild, it feels mean, it feels chaotic, and then at the end of the session, after we've kind of calmed that thing down and also my therapist always asks like, "Okay, well, like, how close do you wanna be to this part?" Like, there are parts of me that I've literally had to say, they need to stay in a locked box, and I need to be at least 10 feet away from that box. I
Mhm.
cannot get closer. And there are some where I'm like, "Okay, it can live in my body," or it can be, next to my body, but it can't touch me. And it's kind of, like, funny how it just really immediately pops up what I feel comfortable with. But with, like, the Tasmanian devil example, by the end of kind of communicating with that part, instead of a Tasmanian devil that's ripping around my body, all I see is, like, a broken, crying three-year-old baby who just needs to be held, you know? And that's can be, like, a pretty strong pipeline, at least for me, of, like, what it looks like initially. And maybe it's mean, maybe it's spewing insults at me, maybe it's telling me I'm stupid and dumb or whatever,
Mhm.
because if I get close and I understand some things, it feels unsafe because it's done its job for 20 something years, right? Like I'm taking it out of its job and that's at first
Mhm.
uncomfortable.
That's a great example too. One of
Yeah.
the ones in the book that I really liked was, and this is the one you can listen to, but he did parts work with this guy who had been bullied a lot when he was younger. And then that led him to be a bully. And
Mm-hmm.
so the like parts work was going back to the initial like bullied part and being like working through that part before, you know, they deal with like the bullying behavior. It was really, really fascinating. And it was interesting too, because like that guy went into it being like, I don't like not really buying into the parts
Yeah.
thing. And then immediately it was like, oh, this part actually just popped up and like wants to have a conversation.
And he's here.
Yeah. So I thought that was a really good example too. And then, like, honestly, the bullying behavior is a great example of like
Yeah.
a protective part who, like, you were bullied. Okay. Now you're like, this
Mm-hmm.
other part is now trying to protect the bullied part.
Yeah, completely.
So I was going to
Mm.
see if there, do we miss anything else on our bullet points?
I want to briefly touch on psilocybin.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me see if there's anything else that I've highlighted. And then the like again, this is like just for people's knowledge, but the different types of parts that he talks about are exiles.
Mm-hmm.
Um mm, and then managers
Oh yeah, managers.
and firefighters
Mm-hmm.
and protectors.
Okay, exiles, managers, firefighters, protectors.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I just really recommend reading it if you
I
feel like it's
also
something.
highly recommend reading it.
Yeah, if you feel open to it. I also really enjoyed listening to it. Those examples that Mal's talking about are in the audiobook, so you don't have to go and independently listen to them. And also I got it through the library on my,
Yeah.
I think Libby or Hoopla, one of the two.
Yeah. I feel like the one part that he talks about God a lot,
Mhm.
which has been, I think it's his way. Well, I don't know if he's religious or not, but I think it's his way of like maybe making people who are religious connect to the concept, because he talks a lot about how self is God.
Mhm.
And but I think, I don't know, I've sort of been like, well, it just makes sense that self is self. Like self doesn't also have to be God unless that is your religious beliefs, you know?
Yeah. That's interesting. I had completely forgotten about that aspect. God means something very entirely different than to me than what I think the normal definition is. So anytime God stuff is mentioned, I just apply my definition to it and it feels aligned. But
That's what I did too, but
yeah, I very similarly view like I guess I don't I think it's really hard to explain how I view this with words because I think it's a little bit beyond the scope of words. But I think if you think of yourself, your true self, like whether that's your soul or just the truest aspect of yourself in this human body, whether or not you think it continues on or not. And then you think of like the plants and the trees and how they all undeniably have that like energy pulse to them in a way, or that like spirit. I guess I think that my true self is connected to those sorts of true self. So, and to me, you people describe that as God. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like a universal connection, I think, of the truest sense of being of all living things.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot more sense than God to me. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, yeah, I mean, trees talk to each other, so we're
I
obviously
know.
all
Yeah.
connected, but like,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense that there's some man up in, you know,
No.
up above us controlling our lives. Just
No.
saying.
And that
So,
has never been my definition of
no, no,
God
no, I
either.
know.
Yeah. What if I just did like a hard turn into like,
By the way,
yeah.
you're coming out about God.
No, I just think I do agree that it is hard to conceptualize something like that. And even just thinking about like the wisdom of a forest or something makes your brain kind of like like be like, "What? Like, what do you mean the trees are talking to each other or all these living things and ecosystems are happening at the same time?" Like, I think sometimes the world that we live in is a little bit incomprehensible, so it's easier to be like, "Poof, God," you know what I mean? Like, God created
Totally.
it all, or the opposite where it's like every single thing is just a random coincidence and a product of evolution.
Did you know that different trees have different scents to them and those scents impact our brains differently? So, like if you walk in
Really?
a forest of certain types of trees, it can put you in a different mood than if you walk in a
Hmm.
different forest with different types of trees.
Did you read I think it's called The Mother Tree?
I didn't, but I read a long New York Times article that was based on that book. So I feel
Okay.
like, yeah. I also had just this is one last thing on everything being connected, and then we can go into your your story. But I sent you guys pictures of the ducks, and I just have
Mhm.
to tell the duck story because
Yeah.
I feel like it is just the most beautiful story of all time. So there's this mama duck, and for the past 3 years, she has come to the same planter at GW on the third floor of the student center. Don't know how she gets there. She shows
Oh.
up into this planter and she has her babies. And like this is now the third year she's come. So we know to put water there. And so she lays her eggs. She had 13 babies this time. And so when the baby ducks have hatched, she walks them from the third floor of the student center, like outside on a patio. They jump from the third floor down to the second floor, and then from the second floor down to the ground floor. And like I sent McKenna and Laura a video, but they all just kind of like throw their bodies off because they can't fly yet. And
Mhm.
apparently they can jump from a lot higher and still survive, like
That
from
jump,
six
when you sent
floors.
that, there was no context to the video. This jump, I my heart was in my throat.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, we can put it on the story. Yeah, the little babies just throw themselves off because anyway, but they survive. Anyway, but then this is the third year in a row that we've called wildlife, like the wildlife division in DC, and they bring two men with vests and literally walk the ducks down to the National Mall. And
Stop it.
the duck knows that that's happening because she chooses to come back to the same spot
Yeah.
3 years in a row. So she knows that she's safe. And like they literally like stop traffic and the mom with the 13 ducklings all walk down like 21st Street all the way down to the mall.
Stop it.
Is that not like the cutest story of all time?
How do they know when they're ready to go on the move?
She just knows. And it was super interesting too. I didn't actually get to watch that. I got some of those videos, but apparently, so she couldn't see the ducklings up from where they were jumping. The
Mhm.
mama couldn't. But when the 13th jumped off, she turned around and walked away. So she knew there was 13 and she was
Whoa.
counting.
I wonder if that's I wonder how that works. Like, do you think she was counting or do you think that she knew each of their smells?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure. I don't know specifically, but she's clearly smart because she makes it back to the
Yeah.
same place every year,
Dude,
which is like,
nature is oof,
it really, I mean, that's like
wild.
for me, whenever we like talk about like eating animals and we act like they don't have feelings at all, like, and they're
Mhm.
not smart. Sometimes I'm like, I think if you eat meat, you need to understand they do. Like I eat meat
Mhm.
still occasionally, but like I think we can't just like take that aspect away from them to make us feel better about
Yeah.
eating meat because they are so real. Like they are so smart. And I think
Yeah.
if you eat meat, you do need to grapple with the reality
Yeah.
of like their lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, which is why everyone should read the book The Omnivore's Dilemma.
Oh, I was like, yeah, I totally Omnivore's Dilemma, 10 out of 10.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's with everything, right? And that's an aspect of us trying to, you know, I don't know, survive on this earth, right? Like
Mhm.
everything requires some sort of moral sacrifice in some way.
Yep.
It's pretty fun if you ask me.
Yeah. Okay, tell us about your
Okay.
experience.
So I don't know if you've gotten to this part in the book yet, Mal, and I obviously don't have it in front of me, so I can't reference the specific study. But Richard Schwartz mentioned that there was two IFS trained practitioners that were independently holding a separate study, like completely from IFS, on psilocybin. So they didn't disclose and they didn't engage with IFS work within the study. It was strictly on psilocybin. And basically what they noticed is throughout this study with psilocybin, the same language kept popping up that they used in IFS work. And so it was like a natural thing that these people weren't aware, even they didn't even have, awareness of what IFS was. They were naturally coming to this language and these conclusions and this work through the use of psilocybin, obviously in a controlled setting, without prompting, that Richard Schwartz teaches, which I just think that example is like mind blowing to me, because we talked about it last week, but how psilocybin can lower some of your defenses and some of your parts so that you can actually really work with that self energy part. And I don't know, I think that there's something really intriguing to me, and something I really like to think about is, again, how there's that kind of universal knowing and universal way of being connected to our bodies that everything and everyone knows. And it's just whether or not we're willing to engage with the work to get closer to being comfortable with that. And if we're willing to pause maybe some other life circumstances or quote distractions, even though I don't think they're bad all the time, in order to engage with that part. So I think, people use a lot of things to like push that away, like whatever that is for you, right? It could be drugs or alcohol, or it could be TV and social media, or it could be unhealthy relationships, or it could be, literally anything that you can think of can be used as something to keep you separated from yourself. And I don't mean that in a way of like, you must move to the middle of nowhere and get as quiet as possible and go on a silent retreat and do this every single day. You must meditate every single day. I don't think that's the situation at all, because I think that gets really unhealthy, because we exist in this world with all of these, stimuli. But I do think that it's kind of nice to be generally aware of like, I don't know, even when you look at religion or like spiritual teachings, when you boil them down, they're all kind of saying the same thing in different ways. Take out problematic Bible and religious stuff or that sort of thing. But like true teachings from people, or true, I don't know, examples or stories or whatever, like it is all kind of in the same line. And so I just think that that's a really interesting piece about how cool like our sense of self is and our true self. And I don't know, we don't have to obviously live in it as much as possible, but I think that if we make decisions that are beneficial for us and whatever that means, it just helps us build that relationship.
I was thinking about how often in our day-to-day life we use the language of IFS though without really knowing it.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, saying like, I feel like I say a lot like, oh, that part of me is,
Oh yeah.
and like, but I never really thought about it as like, what am I saying when I say that? Like maybe I'm realizing a part that I didn't even know to identify until I say that out loud.
But it's also cool because that shows me that like there are layers of progression to get to the spot that you're at now where you can engage with those parts, right? Like we started at, there's a big social media and language pushing in academia and all these other places of, we are not our anxiety. I have anxiety. I'm not an anxious person, right? Like I feel like it started at just the language, like separating the language. But then it's interesting that directly plays into now how you can now identify parts of yourself. Whereas at that time, that was the newest idea. Like I remember switching my language to be like, why am I always saying I'm an anxious person? I'm not an anxious person. I'm a person with anxiety. You know what I mean?
And that anxiety has a purpose.
Yeah. But it's just like fucking cool to me because you can see it collectively kind of happen as well. Like even with body stuff and people online, like you can see the evolution of how that has happened. too,
Yep.
right? Like there's so many little things that you look at and you think they happen so slowly, but then when you look back, you're like, wait, there was a lot of people engaging in this for a long time that have kind of followed a similar trajectory and are now talking about very different things than what they originally started talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I think intuitive eating is a great example. How
Yeah.
it's like for example, I'm working right now on putting these workshops together for GW. And so I was doing some like comparative analyses of other universities, and like every other university already is doing workshops on intuitive eating. And I was like,
Wow.
5 years ago, certainly not.
5
Like
years ago,
they
you
would
would
be
be
doing one on
they would laugh in your
diets.
face. Yeah.
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
just, I'm like, wow, we're at a place where universities are lecturing on intuitive eating, not on like the Mediterranean diet, you know?
Mhm. And I think for better or for worse, I don't think that could have happened without social media.
Oh, certainly not.
Right? Like the progress
Certainly
is
not.
happening so quickly because we all have access to this like universal knowledge base.
Yep.
And if enough people are kind of doing it at the same time, you know, whoever put the bug in your ear about intuitive eating was most likely different than whoever put the bug in my ear about intuitive eating.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's weird too, because then we can get so deep in the weeds here, but like then as a public, we've given careers to these people who kind of that are good at their job, but also were just kind of at the right place at the right time with what their content and their own healing journey and what they were willing to share.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then they become like massive pillars in this space.
Mm-hmm. It is
I don't know.
fascinating.
I can like really sit here for a long time and be like, what is this world?
Did you want to talk about your shrooms experience at all?
Um, I don't really feel like I have any specific details to share that aren't one that wouldn't make people like overwhelmed with my experience and because it is really intense. But I think my overall takeaway is just I think it can be really beneficial if you feel safe and comfortable. And definitely, I always recommend having someone there to kind of check in on you if you do engage with stuff like that. Or even, do a therapy assisted situation. A lot of people are doing ketamine assisted therapy now, which I'm not sure exactly how I feel because I feel very connected to the plant itself, like the wisdom of the plant. That I don't think I would do ketamine, at least right now. But yeah, whatever floats your boat. And I think it just can be a really beautiful experience to like let those parts lower. And I do think it's important to do like the other almost like day-to-day work with it. Like I don't think that it's just obviously solves everything immediately, but um it does kind of lower the defenses and allows for me whenever I've been on a psychedelic, it's like I feel like the barriers between things lower for me and I can really feel like like this is going to sound so like woo woo, but just like the way that energy moves and is connected and how we're all connected and how some of these decisions that we make in the day to day feel really big and scary, but at the end of the day, like it's okay, or how I might really love my job. But when I'm in an experience like that, it is not one of my main pillars of why I'm here. And as much as it benefits me and also frustrates me sometimes, like it's really the least important thing about my life. So,
Amen.
yeah, that might be different for you. Like I think through those experiences I've been able to solidify what is most important to me, right? Like what are my pillars? But yeah,
Um, that's all I have.
that's all I have too.
Cool beans. Last pitch to read No Bad Parts, subtitle Healing Trauma and Restoring Wholeness with the Internal Family Systems Model by Richard C. Schwartz, PhD. And if you're
Mhm.
an Alanis Morissette fan, the foreword is by Alanis Morissette. So,
That's very true. And I also, if you are looking for a therapist, I would really recommend asking them if it's not listed, if they're familiar with IFS work or comfortable with IFS work. I know a lot of people who have pretty rigid beliefs that they would never work with a therapist who isn't in some way, shape, or form aware of this model. But you can always ask, right? Like it's always an option to ask, even if they're not certified in it. I think it's an important aspect, especially if you are someone who maybe experienced a lot of trauma.
And you too can ask your therapist to have a therapy book club and
You're
read
so
this
right.
book together. Because I have to say, my last pitch is just so we've been reading 2 chapters every 2 weeks, and it has been such a great way for us to talk about like this book in a digestible environment and then pull in things that we're talking about with my life at the same time. So if you're like, this sounds really interesting, but I feel like I would not read that on my own, may I recommend a therapy book club
Or choose a buddy.
or choose a buddy? Yeah,
Yeah. And some of these things are pretty heavy. So it's not like, I don't think it's something that you need to sit down and be like, I need to finish this book in 1 month, right? Like,
certainly not.
certainly not. But I
And there's a
do.
lot of like exercises in there too that
Mhm.
you could spread out over like a year, you
Yeah.
know?
Mal, do you think that when you read it, it's sometimes when I do stuff like that where I'm like, I put a book down for 2 months or a year or whatever, and then I pick it back up, and then it's weirdly, like, really fits with what's happening in my life right now. Do you feel
Yeah.
like that ever with this book since you are doing, like, chunks at a time? Like, "Okay, this really applies to something I'm going through right now."
Yeah.
I think that's a cool aspect. I guess you could say that for everything, but
Honestly, I know we always say this, but I do really feel like I'm becoming a new person like every month. Like I feel like even just my reflections recently on death, like I've
Mhm,
never thought about death this much, but not in like a bad way, in a reflective way.
mhm,
And yeah, I'm glad. I felt like I was procrastinating talking about death for a long time because I was really afraid of what would come up. And now I'm like, oh, I actually needed to do this.
mhm.
But you know, but again, like now was a time that I was comfortable doing it. I was not ready until now.
Right.
So I think we all have timelines.
And I used to be really judgmental about my own timeline and really try and, like, physically push it to be
Push it.
faster
Yeah.
and, like and ridicule myself and about where I was and where I wasn't. And something my therapist always kind of says to me is this, like, she'll often relate her experience of her life to some aspects of mine, and never like in an inappropriate way, but always she's referenced multiple times when she was around my age being in this like healing era of sorts for like just a few years where you're just really deep in it. And I feel like that has been very true to my experience. Like we are a hyperdrive for like 3, 4 years. And I feel like I'm kind of coming on that tail end with all of these like integrations that have been happening recently. And not that it stops, right? Like it always keeps going, but it was almost like I was able to find peace with these aspects of myself or past traumas or experiences that now I can move forward with a healthy understanding and relationship with how those affected me rather than in a place of like hiding from them.
Yeah.
And I just think that that concept of like a healing era is really beautiful because anytime I'm mad or upset about myself of like you should be further in your career or you should be have more money or you should do this. It's like, okay, well, I just worked my fucking ass off for like 4 years to undo all of these things and break generational trauma so that my children don't have to do this shit. Like they'll have
I
other things
processed the
for sure.
shit out of this.
Literally, like I have been
Yeah.
processing, I've been busy.
Yeah.
And I think when you can kind of take that lens of like, we're not here to be productive, we're here to live our life and be a human being. I don't know, it just takes so much pressure off.
I agree. I love the in our healing era. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm very much there.
Yeah. And rant. But yeah, check it out. Check out internal family systems. We got a bunch of responses on our stories that
Mhm.
we did on Friday, which was really cool to see. I would say like very roughly 70% didn't know about IFS and about 30% did. Yeah, that's the math. 30, 70. There we go. Um, which I think is cool. Like there were definitely people that responded that knew about it that I was surprised to hear was like familiar with it all. And I just think that's a cool thing because I don't think people are going around being like, "Hey, have you heard about IFS?" Like,
Now I'm definitely going to do that though. Well, and
yeah.
also just, yeah, last thought ish, but I feel like you could read this whole book and decide, okay, parts of this I think are really aligned with me and parts maybe don't as much. Like,
Mhm.
I think if you don't want to use those labels for your parts, just take the parts where
Yeah.
at like face level. So it's not something where I feel like you have to buy into the entire model in
Mm-mm.
order to get value from it.
No. And oftentimes, like, the labels of manager or firefighter really don't align with me very much.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said before, like, a lot of those labels I don't even my therapist never even uses most of the time. Occasionally,
Yeah.
she'll say protector, occasionally she'll say manager. And the one
Mm.
time we did the exile, she was like, "Uh-oh, I think there's an exile." She didn't say it like that, but she was like,
Uh-oh.
I'm wondering if we're working with an exile right now."
Mm.
But yeah, this is I never buy books ever, ever. And because I feel like I need my book collection because I've just been, schlepping my stuff around the country for the past 6 years. I don't want like a huge collection, but this is a book that I need on my bookshelf. So I
Does
think
that
it's
mean I
good
have to
to
send it back to you afterwards?
No, this is a gift to you.
Oh, okay.
No, this I
Like, cause
bought
I
this
want
book
it on my
No, I
bookshelf
bought this book
too.
for you, for you.
Okay.
This was not Yeah, this was not, "Here, take my old one." This was
I was
your
like,
copy.
cause you didn't really tell me that if you
No.
wanted it back.
I never owned it for myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
But now you have one yourself?
No, I need to order it.
Oh, well, we can just share this one. We'll live together anyway.
Yeah, you're right. We're
Yeah.
all gonna live together in one big commune. Just
And
kidding.
you're joking, but I'm not. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you have any
Okay.
extra questions on IFS, maybe Ken and I can do an Ask Us Anything on this
Mhm.
in a couple months after you've had some time to process. I think that would be fun.
Yeah, and also if you have any stories that you don't feel like you can share with anyone else but your therapist because maybe someone else doesn't understand IFS, share them with us. We won't tell anyone.
And we'd
We
love
just
to
would love to
hear.
hear.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
love
Thanks,
you.
friends. Love you. Bye.
Bye.